Welcome to another episode of British Guy Carves Thing and hopes people will watch and share, hint hint. Now that we have that awkwardness out of the way, I'm going to show you how I turned this block of maple into a hare man I designed. I call it hare man because I have no better name for it yet. I start with drilling a stepped hole into the bottom of this wood chunk to accommodate the woodcarver's screw, which is tapered. The tapering allows the screw to be screwed in very tightly, which is good. If you can't grasp what I mean, then imagine the tip of a pyramid pushing into a hole. The pyramid has a thread on it like a screw. The more you turn, the tighter it gets. I feel there's a better way to explain that, but hopefully you understand. We then slot the woodcarver's screw through the hole into the stand and chuck a chunk of pine and oak around it to take up the extra space. Believe it or not, they didn't come with a screw, I made those myself. Here goes the wing nut. Oh, close up. Now I'm going to use a cheap camera trick to make a saw appear in my hand and wow the people of YouTube. This part of the process I like to call saw and chisel furiously until a block of wood looks less blocky. As always, we can speed this up by using the grain direction to our advantage and splitting wood away, or just pulling bits off like this. This can take anywhere between an hour or several thousand years depending on the size of your block, your skills and your tools. If you're a lowly, mostly hand tool user like myself, then this part takes several thousand years. Here we're using a power tool called a drill. It makes holes fast, which helps save me precious time that I can spend browsing eBay for old chisels. Oh, look at that. Thank you, electricity. Coping saws are fantastic, but also can be frustrating when trying to reattach the blade. Luckily, I cut all my fumbling out, so all you see is perfect reassembly. It's particularly pleasing to cut a nice little block and pull it out like a puzzle piece. Then throw it on the ever-growing pile of shavings and offcuts behind you that you were meant to clear out last year. We're now slowly getting away from the ugly stage of the carving and finding our shapes. I found while talking with other artists on Twitch that this is rather common, to experience this moment where you think, wow, this is not what I had planned. I might burn this now to save my eyes from looking at it any longer. But it's the ability and maybe stubbornness to push through this stage that helps get the result that you desire. I tend to use pencil lines for rough planning and bright red Sharpie lines for super definite serious cuts. Sometimes the chisels like to hug the pieces of wood just a little bit longer. This was the part of my Twitch stream where I had to defend my decision to turn the intended briefcase into a carrot instead. This was less a conscious choice and more I didn't leave enough room to carve the briefcase as I'm stupid choice. Here I am being stupid again, answers on a postcard if you can guess what it is that's about to happen. Crap, well I had a feeling that was going to happen. Okay, we'll glue it on and deal with the rest. Did you really know that was going to happen though, Clint? Because surely if you did, you wouldn't have done that stupid thing. Anyway, Clint from the past came up with a suitable solution. Glue it back on. The silver lining behind that mistake was that I was able to carve some awkward parts around the arm and hand before reattaching it, so due to that small advantage I got from breaking it off, I'm going to call it a smart move instead. Sawing between the ears was a little tricky, but I was determined to show the viewers on Twitch that I did, in fact, know what I was doing. When carving facial features, I always find it useful to look up pictures of sculptures. There's something about seeing the defined lines and the shadow in a sculpture that really helps a lot. Yes, those plasters on my fingers were in fact from cuts making this sculpture. They weren't particularly deep cuts, but I wanted to prevent blood from getting onto the wood. Blood is an incredibly effective wood stain, as I found out a few times. Here you can see the scale of this little sculpture next to my large caveman head. Next to a normal human's head, the hair would appear about 3 times larger. As we zoom in on the head, you can see the Twitch chat in the background. Luckily, it's blurry, you don't get to see any of the names they're calling me or the amount of times they've complained about me using a power tool today. I like to call this technique shaving the hairs back. Incredibly pleasing with a large file gouge like this. You might be wondering where this idea came from. Well, I was just randomly sketching ideas and this design popped up. You can see I sketched the figure from the back because that was the stance that came into my head. Why is it a hare man and not just a man? Well, why not? I like to tell you that I'm trying to make some kind of bold statement with this piece, but rather what I'm trying to do is catch this character in a mood, perhaps a relatable situation. Whether you see it as being late for work and grabbing a quick snack, or rushing home after a long day to catch your favourite team playing on TV is up to you. Please let me know what you think is happening in this sculpture. I would love to hear your ideas. I have these tiny chisels I bought many moons ago. They're not the best, but I can sharpen them easily, and I've even reshaped a couple of them to suit my needs. They're particularly useful in little details like the belt here and also the little toes. At this point I was ready to saw the hare off the chunk. I started with a coping saw on his foot and moved to a fret saw as soon as I got to the delicate toes. The other foot I just cut with the coping saw as there was some extra material supporting underneath. Next I moved on to making the base, also from maple. I have about 50 or so of these chunks of field maple donated by a nearby farm. It's damn hard, but with sharp tools and determination and the odd bout of swearing you can actually get some lovely smooth results. If you have a bandsaw, this part is about 300 times faster, but if you don't have the money or the room for one like myself, then I'm afraid you're going to have to sweat with me. I'll take any excuse I can for using a throw to split wood. Not only is this style of tool thousands of years old, but also it's incredibly satisfying to use. I grabbed my sharpest bench chisel to level both sides of the stand as best as I could. I always find bench chisels handy to use in carving just because of how easy they are to sharpen compared to gouges. Then I use a handy hand plane to get a flat and smooth surface. This part took another several thousand years, but it was worth it in the end for the lovely finish I got. I switched between a few chisels, but found once again that the wonderfully sharp bench chisel was the best choice. The little Stanley multi-angle vise came to my rescue. Not sponsored. Yet. Here you can see the hare man stuck upside down in my vise. I took the opportunity to measure and drill a hole in his foot while he was in this precarious position. I used a bamboo barbecue skewer that I had to trim down a little bit to squeeze into the 3mm hole. The bench chisel played its part again, as did my well cut and bashed bench hook. Once I knew the dowel fit correctly, I could drill the hole in the base. It was a little tricky to get at the correct angle, but it worked out well in the end. Even if you're predominantly a chisel carver like myself, a knife is still incredibly useful. What I'm using here is a Mohr 120 knife made in Sweden. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but the versatility of this knife and the lovely sharp edge I get from it is fantastic. This one cost me about £25. Now I want to show you a close-up of a splodge of black acrylic paint. Ooh, shiny. I was looking for a kind of dark or indigo blue for the hare's trousers. Second close-up splodge. Ooh. I added a lot of water to turn the paint into a kind of stain. This also means you can slowly add more colour to the piece, making lots of nice layers and deep colours. I love the watery and faded look I got from this technique. This differs from the oil paint technique I've used in the past where I seal the wood before painting. The acrylic paint technique is faster in a sense, but also requires delicate touches and careful colour mixing. I believe I got an E in Fine Art as my final grade in high school about 20 years ago, but I also feel like I've learnt more about techniques and how to apply them to my liking just by doing them over the past few years than all my time at school. So the lesson there is to quit school and just make things. Seriously though, don't quit school. It's very important. It helps you get real jobs in the real world and not aspire to be a content creator like some guy I know. I was thinking of making the carrot purple like those fancy purple carrots that were all the rage for a while, but then I thought, what if people think it's not a carrot? What if they think it's an aubergine or purple asparagus, which I just found out was a thing with a quick Google search. Pupils are hard to paint, they require a tiny brush and an enormous amount of patience. Sometimes they require repainting as well, but luckily not in this case. Now I'm adding a kind of wash to the dried paint. This is basically heavily watered down acrylic but in a darker colour. I did this in spots that I felt needed more shade, but also at the ends of the toes, the ears, the nose, the ends of the hands and the sleeves. I like to move the washes around with my fingers or take some of the colour away with a paper towel. It was then time to glue the harefoot impaling spike into the base. When the glue dried, I splashed on some BLO or bold linseed oil to really bring out the gorgeous grain in this maple. Here you can really see all the little cuts I did with the Mohr knife to attain this smooth yet faceted texture. And yes, that rag is an old Instructables t-shirt which I wore to death. I glued the hare on the base, and this is what we got. I'm very pleased with how this came out, and so pleased in fact that I'm planning a whole series of these anthropomorphic creatures, each posed in a way that perhaps we can relate to in our everyday lives. Bearing in mind that this came from a random sketch and not some intricately conceived clay prototype perhaps goes to show that sometimes we should just make what we feel and not think too much. Thankfully my brain doesn't have the capacity to think too much, so more of these sculptures will follow. A random fly hijacked my footage appearing on the hare's collar and shirt, but I'm going to take that as some kind of bizarre compliment from the insect kingdom. Thank you very much for watching, as always, and please try and find whatever time you can in your day to be creative. You never know what you might come up with. I'll see you next time.